Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Lana. I'm an environmental justice and Indigenous rights organizer in the city, and I've been helping with the Center for Social Justice. I want to first acknowledge that we're on Indigenous territories, that the land of the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron before that, and possibly other nations that have called this place their home. The talk tonight is sponsored by the Center for Social Justice and Socialist Project. The Center for Social Justice does talks like this and research, and it relies on charitable donations to do its work. So if you're interested in contributing, there are cards in the back, donor cards. You can do monthly, you can do one time. It'd be great to get support to be able to continue doing things like this. So we began this series, Capitalism versus Ecology, We Need to Change Everything, back in January. And we've looked at Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. Looked at the tar sands and Indigenous rights, green jobs, climate change impacts on the global south and UN agreements, urban planning, and just recently Ontario's new cap and trade plan that they announced just a month or two ago. So in this seventh and final talk, we now turn to examples of environmental resistance across the continent, some issues around that resistance, thoughts on the limits to various types of organizing, a look at the underlying problems with many of the issues that we've been covering, the environmental destruction that we've been talking about, and ideas for alternative programs and models that might be more conducive to protecting the environment and respecting people's rights. And thinking about, what would that look like, and actually how do we move towards something different like that. So we have three speakers. One speaker from New York State we're very happy to have, Jody Dean. But we'll start with Niloofar. Niloofar Golkar is a Toronto-based activist with Rising Tide Toronto and a graduate student in the Department of Political Science at York University.
My focus on resistance is because in action we see stuff and we can link different kinds of resistance together way better than the way that we just sit and talk and read. So first I'm going to give an overview of Indigenous resistance across Canada and ecological resistance, and then I'll try to go to some issues around it and a discussion of the wider left and why we need the system change. So the main ecological resistance is against tar sand and its pipelines. Tar sand emits 3 times that of regular oil. It's biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and it is poisoning indigenous land, communities, and water. In West, we have Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline Project. It goes from Alberta to BC, and then there's opposition from numerous indigenous communities happening, and also NGOs and grassroots groups. The most significant resistance that happened in that area is the Unis Totem camp in northern BC. Then we have Kinder Morgan project, another pipeline project in Vancouver. There was a long-term blockade at Burnaby Mountain last fall. 34 people got arrested, and it received this specific resistance received well media coverage. In South, we have the Keystone Pipeline System, runs from Alberta to US. There's direct action in Texas, and subtitled Cowboys and Indian Alliance. Spent 5 days in DC. There's another project called Alberta Clipper Line 67 pipeline. There was very little organizing against this specific pipeline, specifically probably because it's more expansion rather than construction. And then in East, we have the biggest pipeline project ever, Crime Energy East. It carried tar sands from Alberta to New Brunswick. groups have started to organizing against it, and some communities are beginning to express concerns. And lastly, I go to line 9 that we were organizing here among other groups. It's the biggest campaign in Ontario during the last 3 years against pipelines. The provincial and municipal campaigns, direct actions were successful in delaying pipeline for more than 9 months. It cost the Enbridge and other companies tons of money, but recently it was set to go online despite because of the Thames court case. We're still waiting on the result of the court, and also there are a few issues that still need to work out. But resistance movements have important outcomes. It closed the exit routes of pipelines, so then Enbridge kind of struggle to how to expand its projects. It will make it risky for investors to invest in these projects, so then it makes it harder to expand. It empowers the communities by resisting. They come together, they make network, they do networking and collaboration, and it delegitimizes the process and outcome of each of these pipelines, because Enbridge and the market economy kind of have huge propaganda around these pipelines and how they're good for Canada, they're good for communities, they bring jobs, they bring this, they bring that. The activism around this will bring the knowledge that how poisonous and how dangerous are these pipelines, how they affect the communities in different ways, and so that's a huge kind of outcome of this kind of activism. But also there is a question that where should we put our energy in order to generate a genuine change in power relation? And it's a national and regional combination. Communities that pipelines go through, they have different forms of organizing, from blockades to distributing pamphlets in the city. For example, in Jane and Finch area, that the pipeline goes, and many people don't even know that the pipeline goes there. And if it's spilled, what should they do? So these are different forms of activism around this issue, and building allies with First Nation and Indigenous communities is important. Although our strength in organizing and resistance is in being good allies of Indigenous struggle and organizing directly against pipelines, but it is important that we seeing it also as race, gender, class issue connected with global justice, even global wars and overall system of capitalism and the way that it functions. To go more deeply into the issue, for example, we see that most of these pipelines go through Indigenous communities, and within Toronto and other cities, sometimes it goes through the people of color communities, and those are the most people who become affected by these pipelines directly. If we look at Sarnia, the Chemical Valley, and other communities, we see that how the land, the air, the water became polluted, and it's kind of slow genocide is going on. The communities have either the choice of moving away or staying and get various diseases and live in that situation. It also brings us to the issue of gender, which goes beyond the health and miscarriages that happens in these communities. The unemployment, the companies that goes around those areas bring more systemic violence, especially against women, which we can link to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and racism that specifically pointed at them. And by relating this, we also need to think as leftists that how can we expand the resistance against pipeline and go beyond what we are seeing. For example, left needs to overcome the contradictions that many groups have with ecology, especially union activists, and unions need to support the struggle against the pipeline and in parallel start to think how they can shift to green jobs and change the way that they connect to various communities on the land. So I want to continue on seeing the issue of indigenous territories and pollution that either leads to displacement of these communities or a slow genocide. We can frame it as primitive accumulation, this form of primitive accumulation, and how it becomes preconditions of many of the industrial and tar sand kind of economy that's going on. And start to ask the question of with what human cost and also ecological cost we are supporting some jobs in this sector. How can we change our way of life and the way that we all relate to each other? So I just kind of come to this conclusion that it is important not to individualize these struggles, but to see them as parts of a way bigger systemic issue and part of a larger global framework of domination. It means that small reforms here and there is not enough, and at the end of the day, we are still struggling with many other related issues that I named before. And we need to start thinking and organizing to change capitalism as a whole.